The night before Brent was supposed to release this album, he sent his entire team a group text and pulled the plug. A finished album, a recorded lead single, a completed music video, September 19th, 2025, his own birthday, and he killed everything. One text. Most artists in that position push through anyway. The rollout is already in motion. The promo is done. The team is ready. You do not walk away from that. He did. And whatever he was feeling in that moment, that instinct to pull back, to wait, to get it right, is the entire story of what you're about to hear, because what he put out 5 months later is something he had never made before. Not on Saunderson, where he was a 21-year-old documenting his own loneliness from a small apartment. Not on Fuck the World, where he turned that loneliness into armor and called it freedom. Not on Wasteland, where he was honest about being the villain and dared you to love him for it anyway. Icon is the answer. The answer to the question, Wasteland spent an entire album asking, can a fundamentally flawed man actually change? Not perform change, not rebrand, actually choose something different. He went into the Rolling Stone interview in July 2025 and said he was embracing duality, innocence versus indecency, vulnerability versus guardedness. And on this record, for the first time in his career, innocence is winning. Executive produced by Raphael Saadiq. Mastered by Mike Dean, 12 tracks, no features, no guests, no one else to hide behind, just Brent, alone on the record, asking himself the hardest question he has ever asked out loud. This is Icon, director's cut. Let's walk through every track. Raphael Saadiq executive produced this album. And the first thing he and Brent agreed on was that the record would open with 2 minutes of orchestral sound and almost no singing. Think about what that decision cost you. In the streaming era, you have 8 seconds before a listener skips. 8 seconds, they chose to spend the first 2 minutes asking you to sit still. White noise is ambient sound that exists everywhere but registers as nothing. It is the frequency of rooms before anyone speaks. Before the album has a single lyric, Brent is telling you that the old frequency, the wasteland frequency, the armor, the nonchalance is already dead. You just haven't heard the new one yet. Wasteland opened with paranoia and drums and Brent rapping about trust and betrayal before you could get comfortable. It demanded your attention through aggression. Icon opens with strings and a conductor's silence and earns your attention through restraint. Saadiq has spent 2 decades shaping some of the most critically respected R&B of his generation. His philosophy has always been the same. Minimal arrangements, drums, bass, one melodic element, voice, no excess. What you hear in this opener is what that philosophy sounds like applied to an artist who spent 3 albums hiding behind texture and production and features. Strip all of that away. There is nothing left but the room, the orchestra, and whatever Brent is about to say. The confidence it takes to open an album this way is not something you can fake. You either know what you need to say and you trust that the listener will wait for it, or you don't. He knows. The question is whether you were patient enough to hear it. Cole Bennett directed the music video for this track that tells you immediately what kind of cultural moment Brent expected it to carry. Cole Bennett does not take projects for artists who are playing it safe. Wrong Faces is about Brent as the stable option. He is telling a woman to stop looking for love in the wrong faces. And if you have followed his catalog at all, you know that for most of his career, Brent was exactly what he is warning her about. Fuck the World from 2020 was built on a simple premise. He wins the game. He knows it, and he will not apologize for it. That was the whole EP. Now listen to what he is doing on Wrong Faces. He is not winning anything. He is asking her to choose correctly. He is not the villain anymore. He is the stable option that she keeps overlooking. Mathaius, Young, Dilip, and Dpat produced this track with a kind of restraint that characterizes the whole album. Warm, minimal, nothing competing with the vocal, no excess. Saadiq's philosophy running through the production, even on tracks he didn't directly produce. The most important thing about this track is not what Brent is saying to her. It is what he is admitting about himself by saying it. To tell someone to stop looking for love in all the wrong faces, you have to first acknowledge that you spent years being one of those faces. That is not what the man who made Wasteland did. He romanticized being the wrong choice. He made it sound like the only interesting option. Wrong Faces is the morning after all of that. Do you actually believe the change is real? Or is this just a better performance of the same man? When Brent pulled the September album, he scrapped the lead single, scrapped the music video, started over. Half 2 is the only track from the original session that survived. He kept one thing out of an entire finished album. This was the one he refused to let go. Tommy Richman, Dpat, Jonah Roy, first from 92 and NDK co-produced this track. Tommy Richman has been one of the most significant songwriter-producers of the past 2 years. His fingerprints on this are unmistakable. That urgent propulsive energy that sounds like running towards something you are terrified to lose. After debuted as the new lead single on Halloween 2025, it hit #1 on Billboard's Adult R&B Airplay chart and #1 on media-based R&B radio before the album even dropped. The music video shows Brent boarding a private jet from New York to Milan. He is recording vocals on the plane. He is texting his love interest mid-flight. The whole video is about distance as an act of devotion. If I have to, I'll drive this ship myself. That lyric has 2 readings and both of them are intentional. On the surface, he will fly to Milan. He will show up no matter what it takes. But ship is also slang for a romantic pairing, the way fans talk about a couple they root for. He will carry this relationship alone if he has to. He will be the only one rowing. Compare that to any track on Wasteland on that album. Caring this much about someone would have been the punchline. Here it is, the foundation. This is the track where Brent's new era actually begins. Not the orchestra, not the single. This, the one he refused to delete. Benny Blanco and Cashmere co-produced this alongside Dpat and a larger team. That combination is unexpected for Brent. Blanco has made some of the most commercially accessible pop music of the past decade. Cashmere has a textural delicacy to his production that is unlike almost anyone working. What they built together is the most emotionally open track Brent has ever released and the most commercially successful on this album. Maybe it's a little bit rushed, but I'm falling in love. That one line is the whole record in a single sentence. The man who made Wasteland never admitted to falling for anyone. He was always the one being pursued. He was always holding the power. Even when he was suffering on Wasteland, he was suffering with a certain amount of dignity and distance. Butterfly splits cleanly into 2 halves. The first half is pure anxiety. How do you feel over and over? Like someone who genuinely cannot read the room and it is terrifying them. There is no armor in that question. It is completely exposed. And then the second half, the certainty arrives. He is calling her Superwoman. The anxiety matured into conviction without him doing anything about it. That shift is the whole emotional truth of the album in miniature. Yes or no, let me know, or should I chill? That is not a pickup line. That is someone with the armor completely off asking for permission to keep going. This is the track that most people who do not usually listen to Brent heard first. And it did exactly what a great lead single does. It made them go back to the beginning of the album and start from the top. Benny Blanco produced Other Side as well. 2 consecutive tracks on this album carry his fingerprint, and they are as different from each other as any 2 tracks on the record. Butterflies is anxiety and vulnerability. Other Side is weightless. It has the 1980s funk pop ease of off-the-wall era Michael Jackson, beachy, unhurried, warm in a way that has nothing to prove. The Raphael Saadiq influence is clearest here. Dusty 80s toms, electric guitar that feels like it was played in one take. Nothing quantized into precision, everything allowed to breathe. Reviews compared it to Off the Wall, to Ready for the World, to classic MJ. He is describing someone so perfect she only makes sense as a dream. And what makes the lyric land is not the description, it is how completely comfortable he sounds saying it. There is no irony, there is no detachment. He is just telling you, on Saunderson, Brent was desperate, almost anxious to be needed. The longing on that album was not graceful, it was real and it was raw and it was sometimes embarrassing in the best way. On Fuck the World, he had overcompensated so far in the other direction that he would never have allowed himself to say something like this. It would have been weakness. On Icon, the certainty has replaced both the desperation and the armor. He is not performing love, he is reporting it. Other Side sounds like a man who finally stopped running from the right thing and looked it directly in the face. Where does this track sit in Brent's catalog of love songs? Because it might be the most fully at peace he has ever sounded on a record. That is worth something. You were supposed to change your last name. Brent says that, and then in the very next breath, I won't explain a damn thing. That collision between confession and shutdown, that gap between the deepest admission and the immediate wall, is the entire emotional architecture of this track. Strangers was produced in part by Ashani Alec and Jordan Ware, with Jonah Roy contributing as well. Reviewers noted a Donnell Jones vocal influence in this track, that specific kind of smooth 90s R&B where the most devastating things are said in the softest possible voice. The spoken word section toward the end of the track is something Brent has never done on record before. He reads a list of notes to himself. Self-improvement items, accountability items, things he needs to be better at. It is addressed to himself out loud in public on the album. That is unusual for an artist whose entire brand has been a kind of emotional invincibility. Strangers is the darkest turn on an otherwise hopeful album. And it earns that place completely. Wasteland was about being the one who caused the damage, the man who couldn't commit, who romanticized the distance, who made leaving look like freedom. Strangers is what it feels like when someone else becomes that person to you. The pain here is quieter than anything on Wasteland. There are no big dramatic moments, no sonic intensity to give the grief a shape. It is just the recognition that someone you planned a future with has gone completely cold. That quietness is what makes Strangers the hardest track to sit with on this record. He spent an entire previous album justifying the behavior. Now he is living on the other side of it. Has someone you planned a future with ever gone completely silent on you? This track is exactly what that feels like. Chad Hugo walked into this album and changed the temperature entirely. Chad Hugo is one half of the Neptunes, the production duo responsible for some of the most defining sounds in hip-hop and R&B over the past 2 decades. Hugo co-produced World Is Yours alongside Dpat, and Brent himself is also credited as a co-producer on this track. That is not a small detail. Brent sitting at the board with Chad Hugo and building this together says everything about where he is as an artist. This is not a hire. This is a collaboration between peers. The Neptunes connection also runs deeper in Brent's catalog. Wasting Time on Wasteland featured Drake and was produced with Neptunes' involvement. But World Is Yours is a different register entirely. That track was cool and cinematic. This is devotional. 90 seconds into World Is Yours, it becomes something reviewers immediately reach for Michael Jackson and Usher to describe a 90s falsetto over electric guitar. Dusty 80s toms, a new disco warmth that makes the room feel larger. Forever is the only outcome. Consider what it means for Brent to sing that line convincingly. On Wasteland, forever was the thing he was always running from. Forever was the threat, the trap, the thing that would cost him the freedom he had built his entire identity on. On this album, forever is just the answer. The critics who compared him to Michael Jackson and Usher on this track are not wrong. But what makes those comparisons land is not the sonics. It is that after everything this record builds, after all the vulnerability and the self-accounting and the admission that he used to be exactly what he warned against, you believe him. That is the whole achievement. Chad Hugo appears again as a co-producer on 4 Seasons alongside Dpat, Andrew Kim, Dylan Hyde, and Elliot Davey. The production has bell sounds and what reviewers described as Timbaland-influenced drums, tight, asymmetric, rhythmically surprising in a way that keeps you slightly off balance even as the melodic content stays warm. Some days you're hot as July, sometimes you're cold as the wintertime. That is the opening frame. He spends the first verse listing everything he has given: watches, cars, time, attention, consistency, and asking what her job actually is in this dynamic. It sounds like a complaint. It sounds like the kind of thing a man says when he feels undervalued. And then the second verse arrives and the entire perspective shifts. He admits he wanted virtue he never earned. He wanted her to be the steady thing while he was still becoming the man he needed to be. He is not clean in this. Both of them are wrong. 4 Seasons is the most honest accounting of a relationship anywhere on this record because it is the only track where he does not give himself the better argument. Wasteland had moments of self-awareness, but they were usually surrounded by enough swagger that the accountability never fully landed. Here, there is no swagger buffer. He lays out the charges against himself with the same precision he used to lay out the charges against her. 365. The production keeps circling back to that phrase underneath the argument, 365 days. The full measure of commitment, running under everything else like a heartbeat. He is not going anywhere. The argument is loud, the commitment is quiet, and the quiet one is louder. Who do you side with in this song? Because if you're being honest, one of them is probably you. Dpat and Jonah built something here that reaches directly back to the Michael Jackson of human nature. Those specific synth pad textures, that suspended dreamlike quality that makes everything feel slightly outside of time. There are also Keith Sweat groove patterns running through the production, the 90s R&B feeling of devotion as an overwhelming physical experience rather than an intellectual position, and then there's a crowd sound baked into the mix. You can hear audience noise, the suggestion of an arena like the track is being performed to thousands of people even as the lyric is addressed to a single person. That tension is everything. He is an icon. The album title is not a boast, it is a diagnosis, and he is using all of that cultural weight and all of those people watching to sing to one. Girl, it's pure, you're all I need, and then what do you dream about? Not as small talk. As a real question. He is checking whether their visions of life are compatible. He wants to know if they want the same things before he commits fully to the offer he is about to make. Be whoever you want. I'll be whoever I want with you. That is the most freedom he has ever offered anyone on a record. Compare that to Fuck the World, where love was a transaction with clearly defined terms and an exit clause built in. Compare that to Wasteland, where intimacy was always one hand outstretched and one hand ready to leave on pure fantasy. He is not offering a contract, he is offering a canvas, and he leaves the question open at the end of the track. What do you dream about? He is not answering for her, he is not answering for himself, he is leaving the space for something that hasn't been decided yet. That is a kind of trust he has never shown on a record before. This is where the original 10-track Icon ended, not with a celebration, not with a resolution, with a question. What is happiness to you? Is it love? Is it success? Brent ends his album by asking the one question that none of his previous albums ever let him ask sincerely. On Saunders Son, happiness was something he was chasing. On Fuck the World, happiness was a performance, the parties, the distance, the manufactured detachment. On Wasteland, happiness was so far from the subject that the album barely touched it. On Vanilla Sky, he asked for the first time what it actually is. And then the most vulnerable thing on the whole record, happiness might be showing this part of me that nobody sees. Is this a safe space for me to lead with honesty? The vocal manipulation that Brent has used throughout his career as a kind of texture and shield, the pitch effects, the atmospheric distortion is gone on this track. Just his voice, just the acoustic guitar. Reviewers noted a Donnell Jones influence in the production, that specific quiet devastation of 90s slow jam songwriting where the emotional truth is delivered almost conversationally, like the singer is not performing the feeling but simply reporting it. The Vanilla Sky title has no confirmed connection to the 2001 Cameron Crowe film, but the film's central questions: what is real? What is happiness? How do you know whether the life you're living is the one you chose or the one that was constructed for you? Run through this track thematically, whether the reference is intentional or not. He spent Wasteland asking whether a fundamentally flawed man could be redeemed. He spent Icon answering it. Vanilla Sky does not close the loop. It just asks if you were paying attention. What is happiness to you right now? Full Moon dropped as a standalone single in the summer of 2025, and it was the first real signal that something completely different was coming. Before the September cancellation, before Have To, before any of the album rollout, this was the first thing Brent put into the world after Wasteland, and it sounded like nothing he had released before. The sample chain on this track is one of the more interesting stories in recent music. Full Moon interpolates a melody from Ken Carson's Mewtwo off his 2023 album, A Great Chaos, and then A$AP Rocky heard Full Moon and sampled both the melody and Brent's chorus vocals for Stay Here for Life. Rocky's production team on that track included Hit Boy, Thundercat, Loopman, and Rance of 1500 or Nothing. Ken Carson to Brent to A$AP Rocky in the span of 2 years. After Rocky released Stay Here for Life, Full Moon re-entered Who Sampled's Hot Samples chart. The sample made people go back to the original, which is the ideal version of how sampling works. The Fall in Tokyo subtitle is the first half of a geographic pairing with the final director's cut track, Fall in Tokyo, Spring in New York, peak beauty before the decay versus the pre-bloom tension of new growth. The thematic architecture of those two subtitles together tells you more about where Brent's head is than almost anything he says in either lyric. What makes Full Moon interesting in the context of this album is where it sits emotionally. This is the closest Brent gets to his Wasteland self on Icon, that nonchalant, sleek energy, the Tokyo night as a setting for something cool and transient. But even here, the feeling underneath is presence, not escape, not the distance of rehab, winter, and pain. He is completely here in this specific night with this specific person that is a different man. The director's cut closes with One for You, which samples the song If by Destiny's Child from their 2004 album Destiny Fulfilled. Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, and Michelle Williams are in the writing credits. That sample is significant. Destiny's Child at their most harmonically lush, a song about conditional longing and the question of whether devotion is mutual, filtered through Brent's voice asking one woman to choose him. Spring in New York as a subtitle paired with Fall in Tokyo from the previous track. Brent built a 2-bonus track director's cut that functions as a single geographic and seasonal argument, Fall in Tokyo, the peak beauty before the cold. Spring in New York, the pre-bloom tension of something about to open. Both titles describe that specific emotional state, the moment right before the resolution, when the outcome is still unknown and everything is at its most charged. I've been patient. Brent saying I've been patient is a remarkable line coming from the artist who spent Wasteland performing the opposite of patience. He was always the one with leverage, always the one whose attention you were trying to hold. Patience was not part of his vocabulary. If you down, I'm down. That is the entire offer. It is also the simplest lyric he has ever delivered. He has spent this entire record getting progressively more stripped down, from the orchestral complexity of the opener to the acoustic guitar of Vanilla Sky to this two people and one question. And the question is the same one he was asking on All I Want at the end of Sonder Sun in 2017. 9 years, 3 albums of hedonism and darkness and reckoning, and he is still standing in the same place asking someone to choose him. Different man, same ache. Whether she does is a question he leaves open, and that might be exactly right. Go back to that group text. September 19th, 2025, Brent pulls a finished album on his own birthday. And the question people asked at the time was what was wrong with it, but that is the wrong question. The right question is, what was he protecting? Pitchfork gave this record a 5.8. Alphonse Pierre called it decent but limited. Brent went on Instagram and called him out by name. And whatever you think about that response, the data tells its own story. Number 1 on the top R&B albums chart. Number 6 on the Billboard 200. His best first week sales numbers, 45 million on-demand streams in 7 days. Number 2 on the independent albums chart. The audience did not agree with Pitchfork, not even close. Raphael Saadiq spent years before this record working with the most critically beloved artists in R&B. He came to this project with a specific philosophy: minimal arrangements, drums, bass, one melodic element, voice. No excess, no features, no guests. And that constraint, the one that on paper sounds like a limitation, turned out to be the point. Every previous Brent album had somewhere to hide. Wasteland had skits, had features, had a cinematic ambition that sometimes let him step back from the most personal material. Icon has nowhere to hide. 12 tracks, 34 minutes. All Brent, the album he pulled in September, wasn't wrong. It just wasn't ready to be this honest. What he released in February is the answer to the question he has been circling since Sonder Sun: who is Brent when he stops running? This is who. A man who learned to be still, a man who asks what happiness is and means it, a man who finally, after a decade of making music about not choosing, chose whether she chose him back is a question he left open. But the fact that he asked it in public without armor in his own voice, with no one else in the room. That is the whole achievement. That is Icon.